them down there. The Tribune and some of the other newspapers, they had rigged up, they used to use a lot of lead in typesetting. They had melted lead, and they had jerry-rigged these sluices so they could pour melted lead on the crowd when they came to attack them.
On July 15th of 1863, Army units fresh from the battle at Gettysburg finally began to arrive in New York. The troops fired on the rioters for 24 hours until the mob was finally subdued.
What's horrible about the draft riots, they were out of control for days. The police literally could not stop it. Secondly, that it was up close and personal. That to die in the draft riots or to kill somebody, you had to almost look them in the eye.
Herbert Asbury, author of Gangs of New York, compared the death toll of the draft riots to the battle at Shiloh. He cited chronicles of the day that reported more than 2,000 people dead. The truth is, in the mayhem, no one can know the exact number, but it was vast. Many of the victims were poor people with little connection to official bureaucracy. Hundreds of black families chose to leave New York for good. The politician Boss Tweed had a hand in quelling the tensions after the riots. Tweed pushed through a special low-interest loan program that made it possible for poor New Yorkers to buy their way out of the draft as well. The move served Tweed, of course, cementing his votes with the poor Irish as the war ground on for 2 more years. New York had to begin the painful process of reuniting and rebuilding, and there were many who would profit as a result, including, of course, the gangs of New York. None more so than Boss Tweed, though he would soon be exposed at last and brought down by a cartoonist.
One of the great figures to come out of this period and out of New York is William Tweed, probably the most corrupt politician in American history.
The appearance of the law must be upheld, especially while it's being broken.
The way he balanced becoming the benefactor of the poor to a certain extent and also making a lot of money off whatever he got his hands on. And I think you have to understand Tammany Hall went up to the 1950s, maybe the 60s, with that power, and they affected presidential elections.
Deliver these votes to the polls on a regular basis, and there'll be a handsome price for each vote goes Tammany's way. You're a great one for the fighting, Bill, I know, but you can't fight forever.
I can go down doing it.
And you will.
From the ashes of the Civil War, one politician who rose to power took corruption to a level not seen since. The New York Times called Boss Tweed himself the leader of a gang that ruled New York as Napoleon had ruled France. In the climate he encouraged, the real gangs of New York thrived and made more inroads on legitimacy, thanks to the power of their numbers and something many of them had never had before, a vote.
If you're in the streets and you want to keep control of votes, you almost don't have a choice. You have to deal with the gangs. And Tweed deals with the gangs, and Tweed himself is corrupt, and he's able to use them for many purposes. They're very useful to him.
The middle class began to be offended by Tweed's corruption, but not everyone cared.
To the immigrants, to the Irish, to the gang members, he was kind of a hero. They didn't care if he was stealing money. Why should I care if he's stealing money? Who's he stealing money from? He's stealing it from the city. But I'm not the city. I'm a new Irish immigrant somewhere. I barely got a job.
This is how he stole a lot of the money. Tweed built the biggest monument to corruption left in New York today, the New York County Courthouse, or Tweed Courthouse.
What's known as the Tweed Courthouse was the major boondoggle of the 19th century, where they paid astounding prices. Buy a chair for $10,000. I mean, I'm exaggerating that, but not by much. It was a monument to graft.
The New York Times had begun to investigate the outrageous overages in the construction of the Tweed Courthouse. It published front-page stories that would shock shameless defense contractors today. 11 thermometers purchased for $7,500, $41,000 for dust brooms, windows at $8,000 each. In today's dollars, the dust brooms alone would be worth $590,000.
Tweed's corruption is unveiled or discovered by newspaper reporters who pursue him on that. And he at first doesn't think he's really threatened by it, that he can't be brought down as long as he has the votes.
But the courthouse would be Tweed's final undoing, and in the end, it took a cartoonist to topple Tweed.
Thomas Nast, the cartoonist, probably had more to do with the downfall of Tweed than any other single human being.
Thomas Nast drew cartoons of Tweed and his ring of cronies for Harper's Weekly that were so unflattering Tweed himself was forced to comment, "I don't give a straw for your newspaper articles. My constituents don't know how to read, but they can't help seeing your damned pictures."
The newspapers, which are another part of the spreading city and media and public opinion, launch a campaign against him and expose the depths of the corruption that he's brought about, and eventually that leads to his downfall. The government can't do anything but indict him because it becomes very clear who he is and what he's done.
The Tweed ring collapsed in 1871. Tweed was arrested, slapped with legal charges, stripped of his assets, and landed in debtor's prison. He managed to escape to Spain, but Spanish authorities recognized him from Nast's famous cartoons, and he was returned to New York, where he died of pneumonia, penniless, in jail. Tweed left a legacy of corruption, but he also built two of America's greatest museums, the Metropolitan Museum of Art and the American Museum of Natural History, and provided thousands of jobs to starving Irish immigrants. Still, many gangs were rooted in the tight, terrible conditions in the 5 Points.
The most lasting impact of the draft riots in New York City is that people begin to look at the poor and the people living in these hovels and think, well, we can't just let them live like this. Not because we happen to like them, but because if we don't do something about it, it's going to be terribly dangerous. So in the aftermath of the draft riots, you have the first housing legislation, you have the first sanitary laws.
Conditions would begin to change in 1877, when a young police reporter named Jacob Reese was assigned to cover the beat around police headquarters and the 5 Points, which he would eventually photograph. Reese would go on to lobby the likes of Teddy Roosevelt for reforms.
Leading figures in New York society had lent their names and their efforts and their living rooms to have Reese come in and show his lantern slides. He put a face on the poverty and on the degradation that people were experiencing, and that was important because then as now, if you're not in it, you turn your face.
In 1879, New York City finally passed a law requiring windows in tenements. Yet the city was still suffering from a depression so severe it could not afford to even build a pedestal for the new gift from France, the Statue of Liberty. America's identity was far from complete.